When 8-year-old Lila told her class her mother worked at NASA, laughter erupted. No one believed a quiet black girl from a struggling neighborhood had a rocket scientist mom. But when the classroom door opened the next day and a woman in a flight suit stepped in, everything changed. The first time Lila opened her mouth in class, it was to correct Mr. Griffin's spelling on the whiteboard. The word had been aeronautical, and he'd misspelled it with an O instead of the first A. No one had dared to correct Mr. Griffin before, not because he was strict, but because he was forgettable. Yet Lila, who had transferred just 3 days ago from an underfunded school across the city, raised her small hand with quiet defiance. "Excuse me, Mr. Griffin," she said. "That's spelled wrong." There had been a pause in the room so dense it felt like a held breath. Mr. Griffin had turned, a piece of chalk in his hand frozen midair, as if startled by the fact that she'd spoken at all. "Oh, is that right, Lila?" he asked politely, unsure if he was being pranked. "Yes," she said simply. "There's an A after the E." He blinked. A few snickers sounded from the back row where the class troublemakers, Jaden and Tyler, sat slouched like they were born into detention. Mr. Griffin turned, squinted at the word on the board, and after a moment of silent consideration, erased the O and wrote in the correct spelling. "Well," he said with a faint smile, "looks like you're right." That had been the beginning. Lila was used to being the new kid. Her mom's job had moved them around every couple of years, sometimes less. Always somewhere near a military base, a university, or most recently, an aerospace contractor's testing site. She never said much. Her voice was small, soft, but it carried an unusual calmness that made people listen, even when they didn't want to. It was on the 4th day, during show and tell, when Lila's reputation changed forever. Every Thursday, Mr. Griffin let the students bring in something to talk about, usually a toy, a pet photo, or a homemade slime that somehow still made it into kids' pockets. The week before, Tyler had brought in a football autographed by a third-string college player his uncle knew. The class had oohed and ahed, not for the autograph, but for the fact Tyler had something no one else did. Lila brought nothing. Instead, when it was her turn, she stood in front of the class with her hands at her sides and said, "My mom works at NASA." There was silence, brief, expectant, before the laughter started. It was not sudden. It spread like a virus. Tyler chuckled first, nudging Jaden, who let out a loud fake gasp. Then a few others joined in, and soon it was a chorus of disbelief. Even Mr. Griffin looked skeptical as he adjusted his glasses, eyebrows raised. Lila's face didn't change. She waited for them to stop. "Yeah, right," Jaden said between laughs. "And my dad's Spider-Man." "Maybe she cleans the floors at NASA," snorted another boy, Dylan, whose dad managed an auto shop. "She's lying," a girl named Sophie said, wide-eyed in a way that seemed less cruel and more stunned. "Why would someone like her work at NASA?" Mr. Griffin held up his hand. "All right, everyone, let's let Lila finish." But the moment was already broken. Lila glanced at her classmates. Her mouth tightened slightly, the only sign she was bothered. Then she said, "She works on propulsion systems for spaceflight. She's a fluid dynamics engineer." Another round of muffled laughter followed. Mr. Griffin cleared his throat, smiled awkwardly, and thanked Lila for sharing. She returned to her seat without a word. The moment, however, refused to fade. By lunch, the rumor had grown claws. Lila was the girl who said her mom was an astronaut. NASA girl, or, more cruelly, lying Lila. Kids imitated her soft voice and made swooshing rocket sounds when she walked by. Even the 4th graders whispered about her. Lila sat alone at the lunch table. She didn't cry. That night at home, her mother found her lying on her bed staring at the ceiling. The room was neat, as always. A telescope sat near the window. A sketch pad filled with careful line drawings of planetary orbits rested beside her school books. Her mom, Dr. Ava Monroe, paused in the doorway, her hair still pulled back tightly from her shift at Langley Research Center. She wore plain jeans and a tucked-in t-shirt, but there was something in her posture that made her seem taller than she was, like she was always moving forward, even when she stood still. "Bad day?" Ava asked. Lila didn't look over. They laughed. Ava came in, sat beside her, and waited. "I told them you worked at NASA," Lila said quietly. "They didn't believe me." Ava didn't sigh. She didn't shake her head. Instead, she nodded. They laughed at me, too, she said. When I was your age, told me people like us don't work in labs, don't wear white coats, don't build rockets. Lila turned her head. What did you do? I learned everything I could, and then I showed them what people like us do. The silence hung between them like a secret pact. Then Ava smiled gently. How about I come to your class tomorrow? Lila blinked. Why? Show and tell. I'll bring something better than a signed football. For the first time that night, Lila smiled. The next morning, Mr. Griffin was mid-lecture on weather patterns when the door opened. All heads turned. She walked in like gravity bent toward her. Ava Monroe wore her flight suit, the one with the NASA patch and the Langley insignia, and a lanyard with her ID badge clipped clearly. In her hands, she carried a small model rocket engine and a tablet filled with time-lapse simulations. Sorry to interrupt, she said calmly. I'm here for Lila. Mr. Griffin blinked like he was seeing a mirage. Yes, of course, everyone, this is Lila's mother. The room fell dead silent. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Her presence was enough to hush even the most skeptical snicker. My name is Dr. Ava Monroe, she began. I'm a propulsion engineer with NASA. I work with a team that develops high-efficiency engines for spacecraft. Some of the data we collect helps design the thrusters used in orbital satellites and interplanetary probes. She clicked her tablet. A swirling simulation appeared, gas particles in motion, vectors and velocity trails. The class stared as if they were seeing a magic trick. This, she said, holding up the model, is a scale replica of an ion propulsion engine. Someone in the back gasped. Like in Star Wars? Ava smiled. Kind of, but ours actually exist. And for the next 15 minutes, Dr. Monroe captivated a room that hadn't believed her daughter could speak the truth. When it ended, no one laughed. After she left, Mr. Griffin dismissed class for recess. No one rushed out like usual. Instead, they hovered near Lila. Is your mom famous? Asked Sophie, this time without sarcasm. Does she get to go to space? Jaden asked, awed. Tyler didn't say anything. He just looked at Lila with a puzzled expression, as if trying to recalibrate everything he thought he knew. Lila sat a little straighter. She didn't boast. She didn't rub it in. She simply opened her notebook and started sketching again. That was the day the story began. Not the story of her mother's job or the engine models, but the deeper one. The tale of a girl who learned to carry brilliance quietly until the world couldn't ignore it anymore. A story about voice, about legacy, about who gets believed and who doesn't, until the proof walks in the door wearing a name badge that no one can argue with. Lila didn't become popular overnight. The next day, no one suddenly gave her their lunch snack or asked her to sit with them like in the movies. But something quieter, more permanent had shifted. The way kids looked at her had changed. Not all of them. Tyler still eyed her with suspicion, and a few others clearly resented the attention she'd drawn. But many of the kids who had laughed now avoided eye contact, and some, like Sophie, looked at her with a kind of careful curiosity. For the first time since transferring, Lila was no longer invisible, but neither was she entirely understood. The teachers whispered about her now too, not in a malicious way, more in the way grown-ups did when something surprised them, and they didn't know what to do with the surprise. One teacher passed her in the hallway and said, "You must be the rocket girl." Another asked if she wanted to sign up for the science fair, even though it was technically for 5th graders. Lila's answer had been polite and quiet as always. I'll think about it. At home, though, everything felt the same. Her mom didn't act any different after the visit. She made dinner while listening to classical music, her hair tied up, sleeves rolled, glancing at an engineering article on her tablet as she sautéed vegetables. They ate together in near silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they were both thinking people. They liked stillness. Did they ask questions? Ava finally said between bites. Lila nodded. A lot. Good. Did they believe you before you showed them your badge? Ava looked up. No, but belief is fragile. Understanding is stronger. That night, Lila opened her sketchbook and began drawing something she'd been imagining for weeks. A classroom, only it floated in space. Desks were magnetized to the floor. Outside the viewport, a soft blue earth loomed like a watchful parent. And on the whiteboard, written in careful, blocky letters, were the words, "Ask why, then ask again." 3 weeks passed. The story of Ava Monroe's visit began to fade from the students' collective memory, replaced by birthday parties, recess drama, and one infamous incident involving the fire alarm and a microwaved foil-wrapped sandwich. But for Lila, the aftershock had only begun. One afternoon, Mr. Griffin stopped her as she was packing up. "Lila," he said, kneeling beside her desk, "I was wondering, would you be interested in representing our class at the district STEM challenge?" She blinked. "I thought only 5th graders could do that." He smiled. "They make exceptions for certain students, especially those who know how to spell aeronautical." Lila didn't smile, but she felt something bloom quietly in her chest. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." The competition was 4 weeks away, held at a university lab across town. Each school sent a team of 2 or 3 students to build and present a scientific project, mechanical, electrical, or computational. Mr. Griffin gave her the names of 2 others in the school's group: Arjun from Mrs. Patel's class, a 4th grade robotics fanatic, and Jordan, a quiet girl with a gift for code who rarely spoke above a whisper. Their first meeting was awkward. Arjun arrived with a box full of half-built circuits and a YouTube playlist of advanced Arduino projects. Jordan had a laptop covered in programming stickers and a Raspberry Pi she had already programmed to play Twinkle, Twinkle in Lights. Lila brought only her sketchbook, her pencil case, and a folder of printed articles about ion propulsion. "I thought we were doing rockets," she said after the first 10 minutes of squabbling. "Everyone does rockets," Arjun scoffed. "Unless you want to build a water bottle launcher, forget it." "We could build a sensor array," Jordan offered timidly, "but it's too basic." Lila listened. Then, with a calm voice that cut through their noise, she said, "What about a simulation?" The other 2 paused. "We build a model," Lila continued. "A propulsion unit, small scale. Then, instead of testing it physically, we simulate its performance under different conditions. Use math and software to predict motion." Jordan's eyes lit up. "Like in engineering labs." Lila nodded. "We could base it on my mom's work." Arjun crossed his arms. "Can we actually build something like that?" Lila opened her folder, pulled out a diagram her mother had helped her annotate. "We won't build it to fly, just to show thrust vectors and plasma flow simulation. If you help with the circuits, Jordan codes the display, and I do the math." "Maybe." That night she emailed her mom. The response came 5 minutes later. "I'll help, but I won't do it for you. That's how you earn it." Over the next month, they met every afternoon in the library's old media room, which had long since lost its VHS collection, but still had working outlets. They scavenged parts from Mr. Griffin's dusty supply cabinet: small motors, clear tubing, leftover LEDs, breadboards with missing pins. Lila drew models, revised equations, and coordinated tasks. She didn't lead with volume. She led by clarity, by listening. Arjun came to respect her precision. Jordan started to talk more. Sometimes they laughed, not loudly, but enough. Word of their project began to leak. Kids started to ask what they were building. Tyler came by once and made a face. "So you're building a fake engine that doesn't even launch anything?" "Wow." Lila didn't respond. She handed him a diagram and said, "If you know what plasma dynamics are, I'll let you critique the math." He blinked, then walked away. Jordan giggled. The morning of the STEM challenge arrived like a storm. Lila wore her best jeans and a clean hoodie. Her mom drove her and the project in their car, carefully cradling the simulation engine in a foam-lined box. "You ready?" Ava asked. Lila stared out the window. "What if they don't believe it's real?" "Then let them not believe. You'll still have made something no one can ignore." At the university gymnasium, rows of tables stretched from one end to the other. Posters, models, robots, and bubbling volcanoes, some from 5th graders, some from 6th, buzzed and blinked and spun under fluorescent lights. Their team found their assigned spot and began setting up. Their project was humble compared to others. No moving parts, no loud bells or color-changing fountains. Just a small, clear engine model wired to a display that pulsed according to Jordan's code. Each pulse matched to an acceleration reading. And on the table, a neat printout of the theoretical equations and simulations they'd used. Judges stopped, read, asked questions. Lila answered each with the same calm precision she had given to Mr. Griffin weeks ago. Jordan showed the graphs. Arjun broke down the circuits. By the time the third judge had walked away, shaking his head in quiet astonishment, a crowd had formed. Not just students, professors, parents, volunteers. One woman asked Lila, "Where did you learn propulsion dynamics?" Lila shrugged slightly. "At home." They didn't win first place. That went to a 6th grade team who built a working hoverboard using leaf blowers. But they placed second, ahead of every 5th grade team in the city. Back at school, the principal announced their names over the intercom. The office printed certificates with gold seals. Arjun was ecstatic. Jordan cried quietly behind the library during recess, overwhelmed. Lila sat on a bench looking up at the sky. "You okay?" Mr. Griffin asked as he passed. She nodded, just thinking. "About what?" She looked back at him with a small, knowing smile. About what comes next. The STEM challenge was a turning point, but not a destination. After the applause and the silver medal and the principal's handshakes came the quieter days again, Mondays with math quizzes, cafeteria meatloaf, and the rustle of worksheets in faded manila folders. No more newspaper reporters or lab coat-wearing judges. Just the reality of being 10 years old in a world that still didn't quite know what to do with a girl like Lila. But she had changed. Not into someone louder or more social, not into a popularity magnet or a hallway celebrity, but into something solid, like steel. She still drew in her notebook at lunch, still sat mostly alone. But now she carried an invisible perimeter around her, made of respect, uncertainty, and the silent echo of her mother's flight suit walking through that classroom door weeks ago. One day in late spring, Sophie sat next to her at lunch. She didn't ask permission, just slid her tray beside Lila's and started chewing her grilled cheese without a word.
"You know," Sophie said after a while, "I told my dad about your mom. He Googled her."
Lila looked up. "He said she's real, that she's spoken at some conferences. There's even a video." Lila nodded. "Yeah." Sophie looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't believe you, at first." "It's okay." "No, it's not. I said mean things." Lila considered that, then said, "You were just repeating what you thought was true." Sophie frowned. "It wasn't true." "Exactly." And just like that, Sophie began sitting with her more regularly. By May, they were working on a class project together about climate satellites. Lila handled the orbital math. Sophie built the model out of Legos. Jaden even helped hot glue the solar panels, muttering something about not wanting to mess it up. Tyler didn't say much, but he no longer smirked when Lila walked by. Progress didn't always look like parades. Sometimes it looked like being left alone by the people who used to laugh. That summer, Ava got selected for a NASA delegation trip to France. She was invited to speak at a European Space Agency conference on ion propulsion and sustainable fuel alternatives. It was a career milestone and a logistical headache. "I'll only be gone 2 weeks," she told Lila one night at dinner. Lila poked her broccoli. "Can I stay with Grandma?" "She's already dusting off the guest bed." "What if something happens?" Ava raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "I don't know. The world's on fire." Ava leaned in. "Then you'll remember everything I taught you, and you'll adapt." Lila didn't smile, but she nodded. The first night at Grandma's house, Lila stayed up reading Hidden Figures. She'd already seen the movie. Ava had made her watch it twice. But the book held something deeper, less polished, more human. The words told of women who'd worn heels to work at Langley and still walked faster than the men in loafers, of calculations done by hand, of equations written in chalk and sweat, of silence, resistance, and slow-earned belief. She saw parts of her mother in every page, and maybe quietly herself. It was the middle of that second week when the invitation came, an email from the State Education Board. Someone had seen Lila's name in the STEM Challenge rankings. Someone else had heard about her mother's talk. And now they wanted Lila to speak at a youth panel for Girls in Science, hosted at a local museum. She read the email 5 times before showing it to Grandma. "You're going to be on a panel?" Grandma asked, glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Like a talk show?" "I guess." "And they're not paying you?" Lila laughed. "No, Grandma." "Well, then you better get a cookie out of it."
A few days later, Ava returned, sun-kissed and exhausted, with 3 new scarves and stories about French scientists who cursed with flair. Lila showed her the email. Ava read it, eyebrows climbing. "Do you want to do this?" Lila hesitated.
I don't know what I'd say. Say the truth. What if they don't believe me again? Ava smiled. Then tell them twice. Eh. The museum auditorium was small but packed. Folding chairs, bright lights, a banner with words in glittering block letters. Empowering tomorrow's innovators. 3 girls sat on stage. 1 high school senior who'd interned at a biotech lab, 1 middle schooler who'd built a solar-powered oven, and Lila, 10 years old, in her best button-up shirt, clutching a wrinkled note card. A moderator asked questions. The older girls answered smoothly, practiced. Then the mic was passed to Lila. What inspired you to pursue science? She took a breath. Most people don't believe me when I talk about my mom. They think she's too quiet or too brown or too not what a scientist looks like. When I was younger, I thought that too. But then she showed me how to build things and how to prove people wrong, not with shouting, but with numbers. A few parents clapped. One little girl in the front row whispered to her dad, "She's like me." Lila's voice didn't rise, but it didn't shake either. I want to work in space, not just because it's cool, but because it's possible, because someone like me already has. After the panel, a small crowd formed around her. Parents, teachers, kids, one reporter from the local news. A young girl, maybe 7, stared at Lila as if she were made of moonlight. Are you really going to be a rocket scientist? The girl asked. Lila looked down, then up at the girl's hopeful face. I already am, she said. Hey. Back at school in the fall, Lila was no longer just the girl who said her mom worked at NASA. She was the girl who had spoken on a stage. The girl who made math look like poetry. The girl who corrected teachers politely and helped Jaden with his long division without being asked. The girl who still sketched engines in her notebook and read science journals in the library. People stopped calling her NASA girl. They started calling her Lila. Hey! One Friday afternoon, Tyler approached her at recess. It was awkward. He kicked at the gravel a few times, then finally said, Hey. She looked up from her notebook. I was, thinking. My cousin's trying to get into this coding camp. You said your team built that thrust simulator, right? Lila blinked. Yes. Would it be okay if I asked you how? There was a pause. Not heavy, just unsure. Then she flipped to a blank page in her notebook and said, What kind of simulation? And just like that, a new story began. Hey! The story of Lila Monroe was never about one moment. It was never just about a woman in a flight suit walking through a classroom door or a room full of children who laughed at the wrong time. It was about all the times she was doubted, misunderstood, underestimated. And every time she answered not with noise but with proof. With equations and engines and quiet brilliance. She didn't change the world by shouting. She changed it by being undeniably right. By daring to say, my mom works at NASA. And standing tall when the world laughed, until it had no choice but to listen.